She had $11.40 to her name after 39 years of marriage. Her hands trembled as she set the bank statement down on the kitchen table. Picked it up, set it down again, read the number a fourth time, 11 and 40. And if that wasn't devastating enough. The one thing her husband had never once mentioned, a small rusted key buried deep in the back of his dresser, tagged with 3 faint numbers, was about to unravel everything she thought she knew about her life, her past, and the man she had trusted more than anyone else in the world. If this story moves you to take a moment to subscribe and leave a like, it helps more than you know. Now back to Dorothea. Her name was Dorothea Granger, but everyone who had ever loved her called her Thea. 63 years old, retired school librarian from the tiny county public library system, where she had spent 31 years organizing card catalogs and reading picture books to other people's children, in a voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear her. She was the kind of woman who folded the dish towels the same way every night, edges aligned creased ones down the middle, stacked in threes on the counter beside the stove. The kind who never raised her voice, not once, not even the winter. The pipes burst and the kitchen flooded at 2 in the morning, and Everett stood there in his slippers looking at her like she might know what to do. She had known what to do. She always had. She just never said so out loud. She was the kind of woman who believed that if you loved someone long enough, you would eventually know everything about them. She was wrong. 2 weeks after Everett's funeral, the phone call started. Polite at first. A man named Carl from the mortgage company. He had a voice like carpet, flat and soft and covering something hard underneath. Mrs. Granger, I'm sorry for your loss, but I have to inform you that your home is currently in foreclosure proceedings. She heard the words. She did not process them. I'm sorry, Carl, did you say foreclosure? Yes, ma'am. The second mortgage hasn't been paid in 7 months. Second mortgage, yes, ma'am. On this house, yes, ma'am. My house, a pause. Mrs. Granger, were you not aware? She couldn't answer. She just held the phone against her ear and listened to Carl breathe on the other end. And somewhere in her chest, something that had been holding itself together for 2 weeks, a thin wall of composure built from routine and muscle memory, and the stubborn refusal to feel what was actually happening, finally started to come loose. Mrs. Granger. I have to go. She hung up. She didn't move from the kitchen chair for a long time. The phone rang again at 10:02 and at 10:47 and at 11:23 and at 12:15 and at 1:08 and at 2:34 and at 3:51. Different voices, different companies, different debts. A credit card she'd never heard of. $16,000. A personal loan from a credit union 3 towns over in Hollister. 22,000. A medical billing service asking about an unpaid balance. 7,400. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Thea had stopped picking up. She just sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of her, ringing and watched the late light come slanting through the window. The same window Everett had stood at every Sunday morning for 39 years, drinking his coffee 2 scoops strong, looking out at the bird feeder he'd built from scrap pine the year they moved in, watching nothing, saying nothing, hiding everything. She looked down at her wrist. She was wearing his watch. She had put it on the morning of the funeral without thinking about it. The way you reach for the hand of someone who isn't there anymore, and she hadn't taken it off since. It was a plain silver-faced thing, brushed steel band. No brand name she recognized. Everett had worn it every single day for as long as she could remember. The crystal was scratched, the clasp was loose, and the hands had stopped a long time ago, frozen at 4:12. She had asked him about it once, maybe 15 years back, standing at the same counter. Everett, why do you wear a broken watch? He had looked at her over the rim of his coffee mug with an expression she couldn't quite read. Because it's always right twice a day, sweetheart. And he had smiled, and she had laughed, and that had been the end of it. 4:12. She pressed her thumb against the cold crystal. She didn't know yet what the numbers meant. She would. The morning Everett Granger was buried, the sky over Taney County refused to cry. It just hung there, gray and heavy and indifferent, like a ceiling in a house nobody lived in anymore. Thea stood at the edge of the open grave in her good black coat, the one Everett had bought her for their 35th anniversary at the J.C. Penney in Branson, because he said the buttons reminded him of her mother's coat, and watched the casket lower into the earth. Slowly, mechanically, like the world had decided to keep moving, even though hers had stopped. She didn't cry. She thought she would. She had practiced almost in the shower in the kitchen in front of the bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning, when sleep refused to come. But standing there now with the wind tugging at the hem of her coat, and the smell of damp Missouri clay in her nose, and the sound of the pastor saying something about faithful servants and the resurrection of the righteous, the tears just wouldn't come. Maybe she was empty. Maybe she was still waiting for Everett to walk up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder, the way he always did when she got quiet at funerals. Other people's funerals. She kept turning her head just slightly, just enough to check. But of course he wasn't there. Nora stood 3 feet away. 3 feet, not 2, not 1. 3 feet of grass and silence between a mother and her only daughter. And Thea had learned a long time ago not to close that distance uninvited. Nora was 35 years old and she wore sunglasses to every family event, regardless of the weather. Indoors, outdoors, always like she was protecting something she didn't want anyone to see. Her son Owen stood beside her, 8 years old, holding his mother's hand with the quiet gravity of a child who has been told to behave and has decided to comply not because he was asked, but because he can feel that something is actually wrong. He looked up at Thea once during the service. She looked back. He had Everett's eyes. She had to look away. The house was quiet when she came home. Quiet in a way it had never been before. Not the comfortable quiet of a Sunday afternoon, when Everett was reading the Branson Tri-Lakes News in his recliner, with his reading glasses sliding down his nose. Not the soft quiet of an early morning before he came downstairs in his slippers and asked what was for breakfast. Even though it was always the same thing. 2 eggs over easy and toast with the crusts on, because Thea had told him in 1986 that the crusts were the healthiest part. And he had never questioned it. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that pressed on your ears. The kind that had weight. The kind that asked questions you weren't ready to answer. She set her purse on the entryway table, took off her coat, hung it on the hook beside Everett's old gray jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs and the faint smell of pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked a pipe in 20 years. She hadn't been able to move it yet. She wasn't sure she ever would. The casserole dishes from the funeral reception sat on the kitchen counter. Foil covered, labeled in black Sharpie by women from the church whose names she should have remembered but couldn't quite reach. Loretta's chicken and rice. Marge B's green bean thing. Something from Deb with a heart drawn next to the reheating instructions. She wasn't hungry. She made coffee anyway. 2 scoops. The way Everett liked it. Then she remembered, and she stood there with the pot in her hand and the second cup on the counter, and the silence pressing in from every direction. And she poured the second cup down the drain and watched the dark liquid spiral and disappear. She called Nora at 6:30 that evening. Her hands were shaking when she dialed. Not from cold, from something older than cold. Mom. Nora's voice was flat. Marlene, no, Nora, honey. There's something wrong. Something is very wrong. With the accounts, with the house. I don't know what to do. A long silence on the other end. Long enough for Thea to hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then I told you, Mom. I told you years ago. I told you Dad wasn't who you thought he was. I told you to look at the bank statements. I told you to ask questions. I didn't. You didn't want to know. Thea closed her eyes. Nora, please. I have my own life, Mom. I have Owen to take care of. I can't drive 200 miles every time you have a problem. You should have noticed 30 years ago. The line clicked. Thea held the phone against her ear for another 10 seconds before she realized her daughter had hung up on her. She didn't cry then either. She thought maybe she had forgotten how. Bess Trowbridge came over the next morning with a casserole dish she didn't really need to return, and a look on her face that said she already knew. Bess was 66, widowed, 5 years, built like a fence post, and possessed of the kind of directness that made some people uncomfortable and other people deeply grateful. She had buried her own husband Clyde after a long ugly battle with emphysema, and she had come out the other side not softer but clearer, like a lens that had been wiped clean of fog. She took one look at Thea's face, one look at the phone bills on the counter, the red stamped envelopes, the bank statement still sitting where Thea had left it beside the cold coffee maker. And she didn't say anything sympathetic. She said, "Sit down. I'll make tea." Thea sat. Bess made tea. They drank it for a long time without speaking. The kitchen clock ticked. A cardinal landed on the bird feeder outside the window and then flew away. Then Bess said, "How bad is it?" Thea opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I have $11. Bess nodded slowly, like she had heard numbers like that before. Like maybe she had once said numbers like that herself. And the house 30 days. Thea's voice cracked for the first time that day, a small, clean fracture running through the middle of a word. He had debts I didn't know about, Bess. He took out a second mortgage on the house. He forged Bess. He forged my signature. Bess didn't flinch. She stirred her tea with a spoon that had a chip in the handle, and she looked at Thea and she said, "I figured it was something like that. You knew I didn't know, but I suspected." "How?" Bess set down the spoon. "Because I've been around long enough to know what a man looks like when he's carrying something he can't put down. Everett had that look for years. Not the look of a man who's doing something wrong. The look of a man who's doing something he thinks is right and it's killing him anyway." Thea stared at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't my place. And because you wouldn't have heard me. You loved him too much to hear it." Thea looked down at the watch on her wrist. 4:12. The second hand that would never move again. She ran her thumb across the face. Bess reached across the table and put her hand over Thea's. "Listen to me, Addie Thea. Listen. Silence kills. The truth doesn't. Whatever Everett was hiding, you're going to find it, and it's going to hurt, but it won't kill you. Do you understand me?" Thea nodded. She didn't really understand. Not yet. But she nodded. That evening after Bess left, Thea started searching. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. Because the alternative was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for the phone to ring and the walls to close in and the 30 days to run out. She started in the office. The small room off the hallway that Everett had used for his bookkeeping work for the last 10 years of his life after the accounting firm in Springfield let him go during the 2008 downturn, and he started freelancing for half the small businesses in Taney County. She had never gone through his desk, not once in 39 years. It hadn't occurred to her to. The way it doesn't occur to you to check the foundation of your house until the floor starts to tilt. She opened the top drawer. Pens, receipts, a stapler with a dent in the handle. Second drawer. Old tax returns filed neatly every year accounted for. Third drawer. And there, under a stack of old utility bills from addresses she didn't recognize, a small black ledger. Handwritten. In Everett's handwriting. She pulled it out. She opened it. And the world tilted. Page after page, year after year, going back over a decade. Numbers in his careful, blocky hand. Withdrawals, transfers, amounts she had never seen on any joint statement. 2,000, 3,000, sometimes more. Every single month like clockwork, all of it going somewhere, all of it leaving. She flipped to the front of the ledger. Nothing, just numbers. 12 years of numbers, no names, no explanations. Just the steady, relentless outflow of money she didn't know they had going to a place she couldn't see. Thea sat down on the office floor with her back against the desk. She was holding the ledger in both hands, like it might fly away if she loosened her grip. The overhead light buzzed. A moth tapped against the window screen. And she understood, sitting there on the thin carpet with the smell of old paper and pencil graphite and the faintest trace of Everett's aftershave still caught in the fabric of the desk chair, that she had never truly known her husband at all. She didn't sleep. She didn't try. She sat on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. The creaks and pops of old wood adjusting to the temperature. The sounds she had heard 10,000 times beside a man who had held a secret in his chest for longer than most people hold a job. Around 3 in the morning, she went downstairs to the kitchen and made tea she didn't drink and sat at the table and thought about Everett. She thought about the way he sometimes came home from his afternoon walks, looking a little too tired, a tiredness that wasn't in his legs but behind his eyes. The way he would sit at his desk late at night with the door cracked open just enough to let a thin line of yellow light into the hallway. The way only once she had walked into the office unexpectedly, and he had quickly closed a file folder and looked up at her with a face that was trying very hard to look normal. She had asked him, "Everything okay?" And he had smiled, and he had said, "Just paperwork, sweetheart." And she had believed him because he was Everett, and Everett didn't lie. She pressed her hand against her mouth. The tea went cold. The next morning she searched the bedroom, drawer by drawer, his side of the closet, suits she had bought him at the outlet mall in Osage Beach, shoes she had polished, the nightstand, a Bible with a cracked spine, reading glasses, a small flashlight with dead batteries. And then she stopped in front of the dresser, the big walnut dresser by the window, the one that had belonged to his father, the one Everett had insisted on keeping when they got married, even though it didn't match anything else in the room, and the bottom drawer stuck in the humidity. She had never once gone through it, never had a reason to. Top drawer, socks folded paired. Second drawer, undershirts white stacked. Third drawer, sweaters she had given him for Christmases. He said he didn't need anything. Fourth drawer, the bottom one. She had to get down on her knees to open it, pulling with both hands because the wood had swollen in the late Missouri summer. Inside, an old gray cardigan she barely remembered him wearing, a few faded ties, a small wooden cigar box empty, smelling of cedar. She started to push the drawer closed, and then her fingers brushed against something at the very back behind the cardigan, tucked into the corner where the wood had gone dark from age. Something small, something cold, something metal that didn't belong with the soft fabric and the faded silk. She pulled it out slowly. A key, small, rusted at the edges, attached to a thin metal tag that had been worn down by time and handling, but still carried 3 faintly engraved numbers. 412. Thea held it in her trembling palm. She turned it over once, twice. She looked down at the watch on her wrist, the frozen hands. 4:12. Her pulse did something she didn't have a word for. Not faster, not slower, just different. Like her blood had recognized something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Everett had never mentioned a storage unit, never mentioned a locker, never mentioned a safe deposit box. But here it was in his drawer, in her house, in her hand. A key that matched the frozen time on the watch he had worn every day for 39 years. The watch he had never fixed. The watch he had never explained. She sat there on the bedroom floor for a long time. The light shifted across the walls. The house creaked the way old houses in the Ozarks do when the afternoon heat starts to let go. And Thea began slowly, reluctantly, the way you begin to feel a bruise before you see it, to understand something she did not want to understand. That the man she had lived with for 39 years, the man she had cooked for and slept beside and buried 2 weeks ago in the red Missouri clay, had been keeping something from her, something deliberate, something planned, something with a key. She called Bess. He left a key, Bess, in his dresser. It has a number on it, 412. A pause. Then, that's a storage unit. How do you know? Because that's what keys with tags are. There. But I don't even know where tomorrow morning you are going to get in your car and you're going to drive. Bess. I haven't driven that far in what? Thea stopped. She hadn't driven anywhere alone in years. Everett had always taken the wheel. Always. For 39 years. She had sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window and let him decide which road and how fast and when to stop. And she had never thought to mind because that was their rhythm. That was the pattern of their life, and patterns feel like safety until the day they don't. I don't think I can. Yes, you can. Everett left you a key, Thea. He could have left you a note. He could have left you a phone number. He could have left you an explanation. He didn't. He left you a key, which means he wanted you to go find what it opens. He wanted you to find it yourself. And that man who came to your door, Garrett, he doesn't want you to find it first. How do you know? Because I know what greedy men sound like. They sound like men who show up uninvited and tell you who to trust. Thea held the phone for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the bird feeder swung empty in the wind. The last of the evening light was draining out of the sky, pulling the color from the hills, leaving everything the same shade of blue-gray. The trees and the fence posts and the gravel driveway, and the old blue Buick sitting in front of the garage with the keys on a hook by the back door where Everett had always hung them. Okay, okay. I'll go tomorrow. Good. Bess. Yes. What if I don't come back the same? A small silence. Then Bess said, You won't. That's the point. Thea packed a small overnight bag that evening. A change of clothes, a toothbrush, the black ledger, the bank statement, the eviction notice. A framed photograph of her and Everett from their 10th anniversary standing in front of Table Rock Lake, both of them squinting into the sun, both of them young in a way that felt like it had happened to someone else. The key she put in the inside pocket of her purse. She made one more cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly. She looked around the kitchen. The yellow curtains she had sewn herself in 1991 from fabric she'd bought at the Walmart in Forsyth. The clock on the wall that had stopped working in 2006 and that Everett had never fixed. The stovetop where she had cooked Thanksgiving dinners and 10,000 ordinary weeknight meals. The burner on the left that ran hot, and the burner on the right that she had to light with a match. She didn't know if she would ever see this kitchen again. The thought came to her quietly without warning, like a bird landing on a branch. She set down the coffee cup. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked upstairs to bed for the last time as the woman she had been the day before. She left at 6:30 the next morning. The sun was just starting to come up over the Ozark Hills, turning the mist in the hollows a pale gold. She locked the front door. She put her overnight bag in the trunk. She sat in the driver's seat for a full 2 minutes before she turned the key in the ignition. Her hands were on the wheel. The wheel felt strange, too big, too open. She had been Everett's passenger for 39 years. She had forgotten what it felt like to be the one deciding where to go. She looked down at the watch on her wrist. 4:12. Frozen. But she was not. She put the car in reverse. She backed out of the driveway slowly, carefully, the gravel crunching under the tires. She pulled onto Route 76, heading east past the church and the feed store, and the Conoco station where Everett used to fill up every Thursday morning, and the house disappeared behind her in the rearview mirror. The white siding and the green roof and the bird feeder in the front yard getting smaller and smaller until it was just a point of light in the glass. And then it was gone. Dorothea Granger, 63 years old, $11.40 to her name, a rusted key in her purse, a dead man's watch on her wrist. Driving east into the morning through the green Missouri hills alone for the first time in her entire adult life. And somewhere ahead of her at the end of a road, she didn't know yet, a metal door with the number 412 was waiting to be opened. The first storage facility was 3 miles from the house. Thea had passed it 1,000 times in 39 years. A low concrete building behind a chain link fence on the road to Forsyth, and she had never once thought about it. Now she sat in the parking lot with the engine running, and her hands still on the wheel, and her heart doing something she could only describe as loud. She turned off the engine. She got out. The morning air smelled like cut grass and diesel from the highway. The man at the front desk was maybe 25. Hooded sweatshirt, phone in his hand, half-finished energy drink sweating on the counter beside a small television playing something with a laugh track. He looked up when the bell above the door rang. "Help you?" Thea held out the key. "I'm looking for Unit 412. He glanced at the key, glanced at her, glanced at the key again. "This isn't one of ours. How do you know?" "Wrong tag, different stamp. Our keys have the company logo." He turned it over in his fingers. "Yours doesn't. Could be anywhere. There's like 6 storage places in this county, maybe more." She took the key back. She thanked him. She walked to the car. She sat down. She gripped the wheel for a moment, and then she opened her purse and pulled out a small spiral notebook she had taken from the kitchen junk drawer. And she wrote at the top of a fresh page in handwriting that was not as steady as it used to be, "Storage facilities." She crossed out the first one. The second place was on the other side of Branson, past the strip of theaters and go-kart tracks and souvenir shops that Everett had always called the Neon Mile. The woman behind the counter was older, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a calendar on the wall behind her that was still turned to March. She typed something into her computer. Frowned. "We don't have a 412. Our units only go up to 200. You sure that's a storage unit number?" "I don't know. I just assumed. Could be a safe deposit box, a locker, a specialty place. Long-term." Thea wrote specialty long-term storage in her notebook. She underlined it twice. By noon, she had been to 4 facilities, 4 NOs. She bought a sandwich at a gas station in Hollister because she was too embarrassed to sit at a restaurant alone. She had never done it, not once in her whole life. Even after Everett retired, and she still worked at the library, she ate lunch at her desk or in the break room with Carol Ann from Circulation. She had never once walked into a diner by herself and said table for one and sat down and ordered her own food and eaten it while strangers glanced at her and looked away. She sat in the car with the engine off and the sandwich in her lap, and she ate slowly and watched a mockingbird hop across the parking lot asphalt. She thought about Everett, about the way he had always ordered for her at restaurants. "She'll have the chicken sandwich, no mayonnaise, side salad, ranch on the side." She had let him for 39 years because it was easier, because it was their rhythm, because she had never thought to mind. She finished the sandwich. She wiped her hands on a paper napkin. She looked at the watch. 4:12. Still frozen. Still waiting. She started the car. The 5th facility was 20 miles outside of town, past the county line, past the last gas station, past the place where the houses thinned out and the hills took over, and the road narrowed to 2 lanes with no shoulder, and the trees pressed in close on both sides like walls of green leaning over to listen. She almost didn't go. She told herself she was tired. She told herself she would try again tomorrow. She told herself the tank was getting low and the road was unfamiliar, and she didn't like the way the shadows fell across the pavement this late in the afternoon. She told herself a lot of things. But she got in the car anyway because somewhere underneath the tiredness and the excuses and the 39 years of sitting in the passenger seat, there was something else. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something stubborn. A kind of no that pointed forward instead of backward. "No, I will not stop. No, Everett, you do not get to leave me with a key and no door." The facility was at the end of a long gravel road that wound through a stand of shortleaf pine and came out in a clearing where the light changed, opened up, went gold. The sign was faded, hand-painted, Hadley's long-term storage. The chain-link fence sagged in places. A small office trailer sat at the front, the kind with aluminum siding and a set of wooden steps that someone had built by hand and painted green a long time ago. Thea parked. She sat for a moment. Then she got out and climbed the steps and opened the door. The man behind the counter was old, maybe 72, maybe older. The kind of age where the number stops mattering. And what matters is the way a person holds himself. The way his hands move, the way his eyes track you when you walk in. White hair thin combed back, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was eating peanuts out of a paper bag and listening to a Cardinals game on a transistor radio that looked like it had been manufactured during the Eisenhower administration. He looked up when she came in. He did not look at the key first. He looked at her face. Something in his eyes shifted just slightly, the way a dog's ears move when it hears a sound it recognizes. He set down the peanuts. He put on his reading glasses. He held out his hand and she placed the key in his palm, and he turned it over once. 412. Yes. He typed something into a computer that was almost as old as the radio. Clicked. Scrolled. Clicked again. He looked up. Granger. Thea's heart did something she didn't have a name for. Yes. Everett Granger. Yes. He took off his reading glasses. He folded them. He set them on the counter beside the peanuts. Ma'am, I've been running this place for 31 years. Unit 412 has been paid up every single month for the last 12. Never late. Not once. Not even the month it snowed 14 inches and the county plows didn't come out here for 3 days. Your husband drove out in it. Paid in person. Cash in an envelope. Thea's mouth went dry. Can I see it? You got the key? Yes. Then it's yours to open. He pointed through the window behind him. All the way back, past the second row. On the left. She started toward the door. His voice stopped her. Mrs. Granger. She turned. Your husband was here last spring. Came by himself. Stayed maybe 2 hours. Then he left. He brought me coffee. Sat right there in that chair. And we talked about the Cardinals for 20 minutes. And then he went back to the unit and I didn't see him again until he drove out. Thea felt something turn over in her chest. April. Last April. Everett had told her he was going fishing at Bull Shoals. He had packed a cooler. He had taken his rod and reel from the garage. He had kissed her on the forehead at the kitchen door and said, "Don't wait up if I'm late, the crappie are running." She thanked the old man. She walked out of the trailer into the late afternoon. The sun was lower now, coming through the pines at a slant, throwing long shadows across the gravel. The walk to Unit 412 took 90 seconds. It felt like something longer than time. Rows of identical metal doors, faded numbers stenciled in white paint. Wind moving through the gravel, a dry whispering sound. A dog barking somewhere far away, the kind of bark that isn't angry, just lonely. She found it. 412. She stood in front of it. She took the key out of her purse. Her hand was shaking. She slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly, cleanly, like it had been used not too long ago. Like it had been waiting. She pulled the door up. It rolled on its track with a sound like a slow exhale. She stepped inside and stopped. This wasn't junk. This wasn't clutter. This wasn't the overflow of a life that had run out of closet space. It was organized. Carefully, intentionally, lovingly, if that word could apply to the arrangement of cardboard boxes in a rented metal room. Boxes lined the walls in neat stacks, each one labeled in Everett's handwriting. Tax records 1990 to 2000. Photographs. Adelaide's father's letters. No, not Adelaide. Thea's father's letters. She read the label again. He had written her name. Her maiden name, Dorothea Marston. The handwriting was older, shakier than the ledger. He had labeled these boxes years ago. Wedding china extra set, furniture along the back wall covered in white sheets, and in the middle of the unit on a small wooden table that she recognized it had been in Everett's mother's kitchen. When Thea first met her in 1984, A large manila envelope with her name on it, in Everett's handwriting, Dorothea. She didn't move for a long time. The light from the open door fell across the concrete floor in a long rectangle of gold. Dust moved through it. She could hear the transistor radio faintly from the trailer, the crowd noise of a ball game, someone cheering for something she couldn't see. This was not the work of a man who had run out of money. This was the work of a man who had known something was coming, who had planned, who had prepared, who had sat at his desk late at night with the door cracked open and a thin line of yellow light spilling into the hallway, and had made arrangements for a future he would not be part of. And then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. A man was standing in the open doorway. Not Garrett Lassiter. Someone else. Older, maybe 70, tall, thin, wearing a brown corduroy jacket with patches on the elbows that had been patched themselves. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a face she didn't recognize. But the way he was looking at her, steady, patient, like he had been expecting this moment for a long time, he recognized her. He took off his glasses, folded them, slid them into his breast pocket. Dorothea Granger. She couldn't speak. "My name is Virgil Oakes. I knew your husband for 45 years. He told me you might come here eventually. He told me that if I ever saw a woman with white hair standing at this door looking like she didn't know whether to run or stay, I should make sure she stayed." He paused. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from practice, from years of saying hard things in rooms where nobody wanted to hear them. "May I come in?" Thea nodded. She didn't know why. Something about his voice. Something about the way he said Everett's name, not with the careful distance of a stranger, but with the worn-in familiarity of someone who had said it 10,000 times. Virgil sat on a folding chair that Everett had apparently left in the corner. Thea stood. She wasn't ready to sit. Sitting meant settling in. Sitting meant this was real. "How did you know I was here?" "Bill called me, the owner. Everett and I had an arrangement with him. If anyone ever opened this unit who wasn't Everett, Bill was to call me immediately. Why? Because Everett wanted to make sure that whoever found this place was you, and not someone else. Someone else. Has a man named Garrett Lassiter been to your house?" Thea's stomach dropped. "Yes. Recently, yesterday. 2 days ago. I don't remember. The days are." Virgil nodded. "Then we don't have much time. Mrs. Granger, may I tell you a story?" She looked at him, at his hands which were folded in his lap, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, the fingers bent slightly inward, the way old hands bend when they've spent decades gripping things. Tools, steering wheels, other people's problems. She looked at his eyes which were wet but steady. "Yes, please." He took a breath. "In 1988, your husband and I worked together at Caldwell and Brennan, the accounting firm in Springfield. We were both junior accountants. We were 30 years old. We thought we knew things." He smiled, a small, bitter smile that lived mostly in the lines around his mouth. "We didn't know anything. There was a man. His name was Richard Lassiter. He was a client, real estate developer, smooth talker, the kind of man who walked into a room and made you feel like you'd been waiting for him your whole life. Lassiter, yes." Thea felt her hand close around the key in her pocket. "He had a project, a development near the lake. Table Rock, 40 houses. He needed investors. 12% returns guaranteed. Everett and I, we put in everything we had. We took out personal loans to put in more. We were 30 years old and we had a man in a good suit telling us we couldn't lose." Virgil paused. 6 months later, Richard Lassiter disappeared. With every dollar of investor money, including ours. Thea closed her eyes. They found him eventually, 3 years later, living outside Tucson under a different name. By then, he'd spent most of it. There was nothing to recover. How much? Virgil met her eyes. Mine was 42,000. Everett's was 68. She felt the floor shift beneath her. Not physically, something deeper. $68,000. In 1988, Everett had been 30 years old. She had been 25. Nora had been 1. How long did it take to pay it back? 20 years, Mrs. Granger. Everett paid it every month, never missed, not once, until 2008. He never told me. No, ma'am, he didn't. Why? Virgil looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were wet now openly without apology. Because you had just had a child. You were exhausted. You were working half days at the library because Nora was sick that whole first year, the ear infections, the fevers, the nights you sat up with her in the rocking chair. You were trying to hold a family together on one income and not enough sleep. And Everett loved you so much, Mrs. Granger, that he took it. All of it. He worked Saturdays, he took side jobs. He did bookkeeping for every feed store and bait shop and church office in Taney County for 30 years. He fixed the books for people who couldn't afford a real accountant and charged them half what they owed, and did it anyway because the work kept him from thinking about the debt. Virgil's voice cracked. A clean break like a branch under snow. And he never told you because telling you would have meant admitting he had failed you. And he could not bear it. He could not bear it, Mrs. Granger. Thea sat down slowly on the edge of the wooden table. She didn't trust her legs anymore. She was thinking about every winter coat Everett had patched instead of replacing. Every birthday he had said, "No, honey, I don't need anything. I have everything I need." Every fishing trip he said he didn't want to go on because the license fee went up. Every Christmas morning, he sat in his recliner watching Nora open presents with a face that was smiling, but also something else, something behind the smile that she had never been able to name, and now she could. Shame. It had been shame. Held in for 39 years like a breath that was never released. Virgil. The new debts. The ones that came after I buried him. The ones that wiped out everything. Yes. What were those for? Virgil was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "Mrs. Granger, Everett had a heart attack 3 years ago." She stared at him. "He didn't tell you about that either, did he?" She shook her head slowly. "He told me he pulled a muscle, carrying firewood." Yes, that sounds like Everett. There were medical bills, a lot of them. Tests, procedures, specialists in Springfield. He had switched to a cheaper insurance plan a few years before to save money. He thought he was healthy enough to risk it. He was wrong. He was wrong. And the second mortgage, the credit cards to pay the medical bills, and to keep paying for something else he was committed to. Thea looked at him. What else? Virgil took a deep breath. The kind of breath a man takes before he says something he has carried alone for too long. My wife Rutan had a stroke in 2012. She's been in long-term care ever since. The cost is insignificant. I lost most of what I had the first 3 years. The house, the savings, everything except a small apartment in Ozark and enough to keep the lights on. He looked down at his hands. Everett for the last 12 years has been helping me cover her care. 2,000 a month, sometimes more. Thea stopped breathing. What he was paying for my wife's care, Mrs. Granger. Every month, for 12 years. Without telling you. Without telling anyone. Why? Because in 1988, when we both lost everything to Richard Lassiter, Everett's family had a small amount of money coming. An inheritance from an uncle. Not much, but enough to cushion the fall. Mine didn't. I had nothing, nobody. I paid off my loan in 28 years. Everett helped me quietly when he could along the way. And when Ruthann got sick, he came to me and he said, "Virgil, we're not going to talk about this. You're going to let me help, and we're not going to talk about it. Ever." Virgil's voice broke. The tears came and he let them. And we never did, Mrs. Granger. Not once in 12 years. Not once. The black ledger. The numbers. 2,000. 3,000. Every month for 12 years. Not gambling. Not another woman. not the dark secret she had been bracing herself for since she found the key. A friend. A friend whose wife was dying. A debt of honor that no one had ever asked him to pay, and that he had paid anyway month after month, year after year, while she slept beside him and made him coffee and asked him if he was okay. And he said, "Fine, sweetheart, I'm fine." She pressed her hands against her face. The watch was cold against her cheek, 4:12. And then the tears came, for the first time since the funeral. Not the tears she had practiced in the mirror at 3 in the morning. These were different. These came from somewhere lower, somewhere older, somewhere that had been sealed shut for 2 weeks or maybe for 39 years. She cried, and Virgil sat across from her and let her cry. He didn't say anything comforting. He didn't try to fix it. He just bore witness the way you bear witness to a storm, not by stopping it, but by staying in the room while it passes. After a long time, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Virgil. Garrett Lassiter. Who is he really? Virgil's face changed, hardened. Richard Lassiter had a son from his second marriage, Derek Garrett. He was 12 years old when his father disappeared. That boy grew up watching his mother fight bankruptcy and bitterness and the kind of poverty that comes not from having nothing, but from having had something and losing it to someone else's selfishness. And his father, when he came back into Garrett's life in the late 90s, broken and broke and full of excuses, told him that Everett Granger and Virgil Oakes had come out clean, that they had money hidden somewhere, money that belonged to his victims. That's not what happened. No, we came out crushed. But Richard Lassiter was a liar, even to his own son, especially to his own son. And Garrett believes him. Garrett needs to believe him, because the alternative is believing that his father was the villain of his own story. And nobody wants to believe that about their father. Thea thought about Nora. About 16-year-old Nora standing in the garage doorway watching Everett sit on the workbench with his head in his hands. About the question Nora had asked, and the lie Everett had told, and the 20 years of distance that had grown from that single moment, like a crack in a foundation, spreading until the whole house tilts. Nobody wants to believe that about their father. Virgil reached into his jacket. He pulled out a worn manila envelope. He handed it to her. "Everett gave me this 5 years ago. He told me to hold on to it. He told me that if anything happened to him, and if you found the key, and if you came here, I was to give you this, and make sure you understood what it meant before anyone else got to you." Thea took it. She opened it. Legal documents, property records, a letter from a lawyer named Thomas R. Brennan. The letter confirmed that the contents of Unit 412, including a savings account, referenced in the attached documents, were the sole and separate property of Dorothea M. Granger, née Marston, established entirely with funds inherited by Everett Granger from his late father, Edmund Granger, who had passed in 2013. These assets were not subject to community property claims, not subject to marital debt, not subject to any creditor actions. Signed, notarized, March 14th, 2019. This is legal protection. Yes, Everett set it up the year after his father died. He used the inheritance, every penny of it, to make sure that no matter what happened, the foreclosure, the medical debt, Garrett, anything this unit and what's in it would be yours. Untouchable. He couldn't save the house you lived in. He knew that. He had known it for years, but he could save this. Thea looked at the documents. She looked at the envelope on the table with her name on it. She looked at the white-sheeted furniture and the labeled boxes and the 12 years of careful secret preparation stacked against the walls of a rented metal room at the end of a gravel road in the Missouri hills. There's more, isn't there? Yes, in the letter. Yes, I think Everett wants to tell you the rest himself. Virgil nodded towards the envelope on the table. Thea picked it up. She held it against her chest. She could feel the pages inside the weight of them, the slight roughness of the paper through the manila. She didn't open it. Not yet. She wasn't ready. She needed one more minute of not knowing. One more minute in the doorway between the woman she had been and the woman she was about to become. A car door slammed outside. Thea's head snapped up. Virgil stood quickly faster than a 70-year-old man should be able to stand, and there was something in the way he moved. Something practiced. Something that said, this was not the first time he had put himself between trouble and someone who mattered. Stay here. Lock the door if you can. He stepped out. Thea pulled the rolling door down halfway. Through the gap at the bottom, she could see two figures at the end of the row. One was Garrett Lassiter. Same gray coat, same thin smile, same posture of a man who believes he is owed something and has decided today is the day he collects. The other figure she did not expect. Nora. Her daughter was standing 20 feet away, arms crossed, positioned between Garrett and the unit. She was still wearing the sunglasses, but her jaw was set in a way Thea recognized a way she had seen in photographs of her own mother. A way that meant, I am here, and I am not moving, and you will have to go through me, Mom. Nora's voice carried down the row clear and hard and cracked at the edges like something that had been frozen and was just beginning to thaw. Thea pushed the door back up. Nora, how did you Bess called me? Last night. She said you needed me. Something broke open in Thea's chest. Bess. Bess had called her daughter. Nora took a step forward. Her voice dropped, but it didn't soften. It couldn't. Not yet. Mom, I almost didn't come. I want you to know that. I got Bess's call, and I sat in my car in the driveway in Joplin for an hour. Owen was asleep in the back seat. I sat there trying to figure out if I had it in me. And then she told me about the man, the one who came to your door, and something just broke. Her voice broke too. The sunglasses couldn't hide it anymore. And I thought if anything happened to her, if I lost her too. Without ever. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Garrett Lassiter stood with his hands in his pockets. The thin smile was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched over something that wasn't confidence anymore. Mrs. Granger, I think we should all have a conversation. Virgil stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but it had weight. The weight of a man who had been carrying someone else's secret for 45 years and was ready to set it down. You should leave Lassiter. Oaks, I wondered if you'd turn up. I said leave. This is private property. I have business with Mrs. Granger. Her husband owed. He owed you nothing. Your father took our money. Everett spent 20 years paying off the debt that resulted. You have no claim. You have nothing. Everything you've shown Mrs. Granger is fabricated. I have copies of every document Everett ever signed and every payment he ever made. And I called the Taney County Sheriff 12 minutes ago. They're on their way. And I have your forged paperwork in this envelope, the same paperwork I already turned over to Thomas Brennan's office twice. Garrett's face changed. The smile collapsed. Underneath it was something younger and more desperate than Thea had expected. Not the face of a predator. The face of a man who had been lied to by his father and had built his whole life on the lie because the truth was worse. Virgil's voice was steady. Everett trusted me with 3 things, Garrett. The contents of this unit, his friendship, and the responsibility to make sure his wife and daughter were safe from people like you when he was gone. I'm keeping all 3 of those promises today. A siren in the distance threading through the pine trees getting closer. Garrett looked at Thea, then at Nora, then at Virgil. He took one step backward, then another. This isn't over, Oaks. Yes, it is. He turned. He walked to his car. He did not run, but he did not look back either. The gravel crunched under his shoes, and the car door opened and closed, and the engine started, and the gray sedan pulled down the gravel road and disappeared into the pines. Nora watched him go. She stood very still until the sound of the engine faded. Then she turned to her mother. She stood there 20 feet away, arms still crossed. Sunglasses still on her whole body, held together by nothing but will and anger, and the kind of love that hurts so much it disguises itself as distance. She uncrossed her arms. She took off the sunglasses. Her eyes were red and wet and fierce, and she walked the 20 feet. She walked it slowly, not because she was hesitant, because she was feeling every step, every inch of the distance she had kept for years, the distance she had measured and maintained and defended and justified, the distance she had told herself was necessary and smart and self-protective. She felt it closing under her feet, and she let it close. She put her arms around her mother. She held on. They stood like that for a long time. The wind moved through the pines. The siren got closer, and then arrived a deputy's cruiser pulling up the gravel road, and Virgil walked out to meet it. And the late afternoon light shifted and turned gold, and the shadows lengthened, and the two women stood in the open doorway of Unit 412, holding each other, the way you hold something you almost lost and didn't, and know you will never be careless with again. Nora whispered into her mother's hair, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. You're here now. I should have been here from the start. You're here now, baby. That's what matters." Nora pulled back. Her face was wet. She looked past her mother into the storage unit, at the boxes, the sheeted furniture, the table, the envelope. What is all this? Thea looked back at the open door, at the 12 years of Everett's secret life stacked and labeled and covered in white cloth waiting for her in a metal room at the end of a dirt road. She took her daughter's hand. Her daughter's hand was warm. "Come inside. Your father left me a letter, and I think it's time I read it." They walked into the unit together, mother and daughter, side by side. The late afternoon light fell across the concrete floor in a long gold rectangle, and their shadows stretched behind them and merged into one. Thea picked up the envelope from the wooden table. She turned it over in her hands. Her name in Everett's handwriting, the slight slant of the D, the careful loop of the A. She had seen that handwriting on grocery lists for 39 years, on birthday cards, on notes left on the kitchen counter when he went out early. Gone to get milk. Back by 9. Lovey. She had never stopped to think about how much of him had been in those small letters. How much he had been trying to say in the spaces between the words he actually wrote. She opened the envelope. Her hands were steady now, inside folded pages, several of them, Everett's handwriting on every line. She sat down on the edge of the table. Nora sat beside her, close, their shoulders touching, and Thea began to read. "My Thea, if you are reading this, then I have run out of time. I have wanted to tell you these things for so many years that the words have worn grooves in me, but I never could. Not face to face, not sitting across from you at the kitchen table where you looked at me every morning like I was still the man you married. I couldn't bear to watch that look change. So I am telling you now with distance like a coward. I am sorry for that." Thea's vision blurred. She blinked, kept going. "Virgil has probably told you most of it by now. About 1988, about Richard Lassiter, about the loan, about Ruth Ann, about the money I have been sending him every month for 12 years. I asked Virgil to be the one to tell you, because I thought it might be easier to hear from someone whose voice doesn't remind you of all the mornings I sat across from you and said nothing. But there are some things only I can tell you. So here they are. The first thing. I never lied to you about who I was. I did not have another life. I did not have another woman. I did not gamble or drink or waste a single dollar of what we built together. Every cent I ever earned went either into our home or into paying for someone else's pain. That is not an excuse. It is just the truth, and I need you to know it before I tell you the rest. I lied to you about what I was carrying, and that is the lie I cannot take back. I lied with silence. I lied with smiles at the kitchen table when I was sick with worry. I lied every time you asked me if I was okay, and I said, "Fine, sweetheart." I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is I was protecting myself. Because if I had told you about the loan in 1988, you would have wanted to help. You would have gone back to work full-time before you were ready. You would have given up the years with Nora that I knew you needed, and I could not bear it. I could not bear the thought of you paying for my mistake. That was wrong. I know that now. I knew it then. I just did not have the courage to act on what I knew. I am sorry, Thea. I am so deeply sorry. She stopped. She put the page down on her lap. She pressed her fingers against her closed eyes. Nora did not say anything. Nora put her arm around her mother's shoulders the way Everett used to, and Thea leaned against her daughter and let herself be held by someone for the first time in 2 weeks. Then she picked up the page. The second thing. Nora, if she's with you when you read this, please give her this part. Thea held the page out without speaking. Nora's hands were shaking when she took it. Nora read silently. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Thea watched her daughter's face change. Watched the muscles around her jaw tighten and then release. Watched her chin drop. Watched her eyes close. Nora lowered the page. Her voice was barely there. He knew. He knew I saw him in the garage that night. He knew that's when I stopped trusting him. Thea waited. He wrote Nora swallowed. He wrote that he's sorry. That I was 16 and I should not have had to carry that. That he thinks it's his fault my marriage didn't last. That he taught me men hide things. She pressed the page against her chest. He said he loved me from the moment I was born, even when he was too ashamed to look me in the eye. Nora was crying the way people cry when the sound can't keep up with the feeling. Silently at first, her shoulders shaking her breath, catching in her throat like a door that keeps swinging open and slamming shut. Thea held her the way she had held her when Nora was 4 years old and had fallen off the tire swing in the backyard in Forsyth, the way she had held her when she was 12, and her best friend moved to Kansas City the way mothers hold daughters when nothing else in the world will do. After a long time, Nora sat up, wiped her face with both hands, handed the page back. "Keep reading, Mom. There's more." Thea picked up the next page. "The third thing, Thea, and this is the one I need you to hear. There is something in this unit you have not seen yet. It is in the wooden chest under the white sheet against the back wall. The one with the brass handles." Thea looked up. The chest was there, under the sheet, exactly where he said. "Inside you will find a folder. The folder contains the deed to a small house, 2 acres of land, 96 miles north of where we live in a town called Calder Springs. Population 412. Thea stopped reading. She looked at Nora. 412. The number on the key. The number on the tag. The number on the watch frozen on her wrist. She kept reading. "The house has been yours since 2014. You did not know. Let me tell you why. In the spring of that year, my father died. You remember. We drove up to the funeral in Rolla and you held my hand all weekend. What I did not tell you was that my father left me money, not a fortune, but a real amount. Enough. And I had a decision to make. By 2014, I had already had the warning from my heart. The pulled muscle. You remember. It was not a pulled muscle there. It was a heart attack. A small one, but enough. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot in Springfield, and I thought about what would happen to you if I died. And I realized that if I died, you would inherit nothing but my debts. You would inherit a house we could no longer afford, and a stack of bills with my name on them and nothing else. And I could not let that happen. I could not leave you with nothing. So I took every dollar of my father's inheritance. I drove 96 miles north. I bought a small white house on 2 acres of land in a town nobody we knew had ever heard of. I had the deed put in your name, your maiden name, Dorothea Maston. I worked with a lawyer named Thomas Brennan to make sure the house could not be touched by any creditor because the inheritance was separate property. The deed is in your maiden name. The house belongs to you and you alone. Free and clear. I have paid the property taxes every year for 12 years from a separate account. I have driven up there twice a year to make sure the place was still standing. I had the roof patched in 2020. I had the well checked in 2022. I have never told you about it. I wanted to so many times, especially the last 2 years. But I was afraid. I was afraid that if I told you about the house, I would have to tell you about everything. And I was not ready. I was never ready. Here is what I want you to know. The house is yours. The land is yours. There is a savings account in the documents in this unit. A little under $300,000. Also from my father's inheritance. Also separate property. Also untouchable. Combined with your social security, this should be enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Not luxuriously, but comfortably, with enough left over to leave something for Nora and Owen someday. I wanted to leave you something clean there, somewhere that had nothing to do with the wreckage I made of our finances. Somewhere you could go and start again. The house is small, white siding, a blue front door, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch. There is an apple tree in the front yard that fruits every September. There is a creek at the back of the property where I used to sit when I drove up to check on things. I would sit there and I would imagine you sitting there beside me. I imagine bringing you there someday, when I had finally fixed everything, when I had finally told you the truth. We would sit by the creek and I would tell you everything, and you would be angry and then you would forgive me and we would stay. I never got to do that. I'm sorry I never got to do that. Go to the house there, when you are ready. The keys are in the chest. The address is on the deed. And know that for 12 years, every time I drove up there alone and walked the property and checked the well and swept the porch, I was thinking of you. I was preparing a place for you. I was loving you the only way I knew how. Quietly, stupidly, without telling you. You deserve better than that. But it was the best I had. Thea could not read anymore. She set the pages down. She got up. She walked to the back of the unit. She pulled the white sheet off the chest. Brass handles, old wood dark with age. She knelt down. She lifted the lid. Inside, a leather folder worn soft. A set of keys on a brass ring. 2 house keys not rusted, not hidden. And a photograph. She picked up the photograph. A small white house, blue front door, wraparound porch, an apple tree in the front yard full of green leaves and September fruit. Behind the house, a line of trees, and beyond the trees, the glint of water. On the back in Everett's handwriting. Calder Springs, Spring 2018. Yours when you find it. Thea held the photograph against her chest. She closed her eyes. The watch was warm on her wrist. She didn't know when that had happened. It had been cold all day, cold since the funeral, cold metal against skin. But now it was warm, as if something inside it had finally been released. She read the last page sitting on the floor beside the chest. Nora beside her, their knees touching the two of them on the cold concrete, reading a dead man's handwriting in the fading light. I do not deserve forgiveness, Thea. I am not asking for it. If you read this and feel only anger, I understand. But here is what I want for you. I want you to live. I want you to wake up in that house and drink your coffee on the porch and watch the sun come up over the creek. I want you to plant tomatoes. You always liked tomatoes. I want you to find a book club or a quilting circle or whatever you want. I want you to find out who you are without me. Because for 39 years you were so busy being my wife that I do not think you ever got to find out who Dorothea Marston might have been if she had been given the room to grow. Grow now. 63 is not too late. 70 is not too late. There is time. Use it. I love you. From the first time I saw you in the tiny county library, you were shelving books in the children's section, and I came in pretending I needed help finding something I had already read. You looked up at me and you smiled and you said, "Can I help you find something?" And I thought, yes, I think you already have. Yours always, Everett. They drove north the next morning, Nora at the wheel, Owen in the back seat with a coloring book open on his lap. Virgil rode with them because he said the drive was too long for two women alone, and because Thea saw in his eyes the same thing Bess had seen in hers, a person who did not want to spend another day in an empty room with nothing but silence for company. She let him come. They took Route 65 north past Springfield, past Rolla, into the rolling green country where the hills softened and the sky opened up and the road ran straight through fields of hay and clover that smelled like rain even when it hadn't rained. Calder Springs. Population 412, according to the green sign at the edge of town. Thea saw the number and made a sound that was almost a laugh. Nora glanced at her. What nothing, sweetheart. Nothing. The house was at the end of a gravel driveway. White siding, blue front door, wraparound porch. Apple tree in the front yard. The branches heavy with late-season fruit. Small red apples catching the morning light like ornaments nobody had hung. Nora stopped the car. They sat for a moment. Owen pressed his face against the window. "Grandma, is this your house?" Thea looked at the blue door, the porch, the tree. She looked at the photograph she had been holding in her lap since they left the storage unit. The same house, the same tree, the same light. "Yes, sweetheart, I think it is." She got out. She walked up the driveway. The grass was long but not wild. She climbed the porch steps. She slid the brass key into the lock. It turned smoothly the way the storage key had, the way everything Everett had prepared for her, turned cleanly and without resistance because he had made sure of it. Because he had driven 96 miles twice a year for 12 years to make sure every lock worked and every hinge was oiled and every nail was set. She pushed the door open. Pine. Old wood. The faint sweetness of an apple going soft somewhere in the kitchen. The front room was small, a stone fireplace, a bay window facing east. The walls were painted a pale cream color, and in front of the window, catching the first of the morning sun, a rocking chair. Thea crossed the room. She put her hand on the back of the chair. She knew it. She knew the grain of the wood under her fingers, the slight wobble of the left runner, the creak it made when you shifted your weight. This chair had been in their bedroom for the first 10 years of their marriage, Everett's grandmother's chair, and one day he had said it was getting in the way, and she hadn't thought about it again. He had brought it here. He had placed it in front of this window facing east, so that whoever sat in it would see the sunrise. She sat down. The chair creaked the way it always had. She closed her eyes. The light came through the glass onto her face. Warm. She rocked once, twice. She felt Owen's small hand on her knee. She heard Nora's footsteps in the kitchen opening cabinets, finding that Everett had stocked the pantry with canned goods and coffee, and a box of chamomile tea, the kind Thea drank. She heard Virgil on the porch, his voice low and wondering, saying something about the creek. She rocked and she breathed. And for the first time in 2 weeks, maybe for the first time in years, Thea felt something that was not grief, and was not fear, and was not the weight of questions she couldn't answer. She felt still. 5 months later, the first frost came to Calder Springs. The apple tree was bare. The creek behind the house had a thin skin of ice on its quiet stretches in the early mornings that cracked and dissolved by 10. Thea stood at the kitchen sink washing 2 coffee cups. The radio was on low, a man reading the farm report in a voice that sounded like warm bread. Bess was sitting at the kitchen table behind her. She had driven up the week before to spend a few days. She was on her 3rd cup and reading the Calder Springs Gazette out loud, which was 4 pages long and contained mostly church announcements and a recipe for cornbread submitted by a woman named Hazel. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. Thea had baked a pie that morning from the last of the apples she had picked before the frost. She set the cups in the drying rack. She looked at her kitchen. The yellow curtains she had sewn herself the second week she moved in from fabric she found at a craft store in the next town over. A shade lighter than the ones in the old house, but close enough to feel like home. The clock on the wall that worked perfectly. the stove that lit on the first try. It was the smallest kitchen she had ever had, and it was hers, every inch of it. That evening she sat on the wraparound porch. The sun was going down behind the apple tree, and the sky was doing something she had never seen it do in Taney County. Turning colors, she didn't have names for rose and copper, and a deep violet at the edges that made the bare branches of the tree look like they had been drawn in ink against silk. Nora called. She called every Sunday now. Sometimes Owen got on the line and read a page from whatever book his teacher had assigned. He was working through a chapter book about a dog who solved mysteries. He read slowly and carefully, and mispronounced the word suspicious 3 different ways. And Thea listened to every syllable. Tonight, Nora's voice was lighter than it had been in years. "Mom, I have news." "What kind of news?" "I met someone." Thea smiled. She did not interrupt. She leaned back in the rocking chair and pulled the blanket around her shoulders and listened. Nora talked about a man named David who taught 7th grade history in Joplin and had 2 grown sons and had made her laugh on a first date for the first time in 5 years. He had brought her flowers, daisies, not roses, daisies, Mom. Like he actually paid attention to what kind of person I am. Thea listened. When Nora was done, she said, "I am so happy for you, baby." "Mom, yes. Do you think Dad would have liked him?" Thea thought about it. She thought about Everett at the kitchen table, reading the paper the way he turned the pages slowly, like each one deserved its own moment. She thought about Everett at Nora's first wedding, dancing with their daughter, in a rented tuxedo that was too tight in the shoulders, his face bright with a pride he couldn't contain. "Yes, sweetheart. I think your father would have liked him very much." They talked a little longer. Then they said goodnight. Thea set the phone on the porch railing. She looked out at the yard, the bare tree, the sky going dark, the creek beyond the pines invisible now, but present the way water is always present, even when you can't see it moving underneath everything finding its way. She thought about Everett, not with anger, not with bitterness, with something gentler and more complicated than either a feeling that had no single name, a love that had survived the man who held it. A love that had been imperfect and cowardly, and sometimes wrong, but had also built a house and stocked a pantry, and placed a rocking chair in front of a window facing east. She looked down at the watch on her wrist. 4:12. The hands frozen, but the metal was warm. It had been warm since the day she sat in this chair for the first time, as if the house had done something to it that 12 years in a dresser drawer never could. She said softly to the bare branches and the darkening sky, and the man who was not there, and would never be there, and was somehow everywhere she looked, "I forgive you, Everett." Her voice was steady, "Not because you earned it, not because you deserved it, but because I deserve to live without carrying it." The wind moved through the dry grass at the edge of the porch. Somewhere down by the creek, an owl called a single low note that hung in the cold air and then dissolved. The last of the light left the sky. The first stars appeared faint, then steady. The way all true things appear not all at once, but gradually one point of light at a time, until you look up and realize the whole sky is full of them, and they were there all along. Dorothea Granger, 63 years old, retired school librarian, recently widowed, sitting on her wraparound porch in a small white house in a town of 412 people wearing a broken watch that kept the only time that ever mattered. And she was for the first time in her entire life exactly where she was supposed to be. Now I'd like to ask you something, and I mean it. Think about the people you love, the ones sitting across from you at the kitchen table, the ones you talk to every Sunday, the ones you haven't called in a while. Do they know? Not in the way you assume they know, not in the way you think your silence says it for you. Do they actually know? Because Everett loved Thea more than most people love anything in this world, and she almost never found out. Don't wait for a key in a drawer to say what you can say today. Tell them, while you still can. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Thank you for listening. Good night.